Welcome everyone who is joining us today online and offline. We will be discussing the topic of boosting local renewable energy solutions to fight climate crisis, but in fact all of the other crises that we are facing today. Before we start and before I introduce the speakers and we will start our panel discussion, I would like to draw attention to this image, and this is actually why we are organizing this event today. This is a solar power station in Ukraine that was shelled by the Russian army back in spring. And of course, we have lots of cases of Russians shelling our energy infrastructure, and that became really a huge problem, especially now during autumn time. But in fact, they started doing it since the beginning of the invasion in February. And what we discovered in Ukraine, I think it's quite interesting, is that Ukraine has solar power stations, wind power installations. We have, of course, big nuclear power plants and thermal power plants and so on. So we saw the stark difference between how these systems react to this sort of damages. So if you think about a thermal power plant that would be shelled, or a boiler power plant that would be shelled, it may take months or even years sometimes to repair it. Because if it's a big capacity and the shelling is, so to say, successful, well, the whole city may be left without electricity and heating for a very long time. But then if you look at these pictures, of course, it's scary because you have a whole huge crater right in, in the middle of the solar power plant. But then it takes literally just a few weeks to reconnect the remaining solar panels and to have the station still functioning. So again, the contrast is very different. So today we will hear stories from different countries of how we can be dealing with huge and different sorts of crisis situations, actually both small and or big, thanks to renewable energy, and how they actually help us be more resilient, how they can help us sometimes survive, and so on. So with this, I would like to introduce our speakers today. We are joined online by Maxim Babayev, who is the coordinator of Ukrainian Climate network of more than 30 organizations working on climate issues in Ukraine. We are also joined by Konstantin Kranitsky online, who is the head of the energy department of Ukraine's NGO Eco Action. And here with us, there is Bhakti Gulchanibayeva, who is the expert in communications of Climate Action Network, Eastern Europe, Caucasus, Central Asia, from Kyrgyzstan. And Gunnar Olsen, who is the coordinator of Enforce Europe, which is also an organization that actually unites many other organizations from all over Europe. And perhaps if it works, we will be also joined by a member of European Parliament, Michael Bloss, who will also add an extra bit on policy issues on renewables a bit later. So I would like to give the word first to Maxim Babayev, who will share with us and continue on this topic of how people in Ukraine were able to go through very hard times during this war, thanks to renewable energy. So Maxim will show us some examples and tell us these stories. Please, Maxim.
Yes, everyone. I'm glad to be here virtually in Ukrainian pavilion on COP27. Can you tell me whether my screen is visible? Hello? See my screen? Because I started sharing
your screen.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Great. So yeah, I'm gonna say a few words about how off-grid solar solutions in local Ukrainian communities helped the communities that were affected by the war in Ukraine, helped helped them survive the war and have at least partial well-being. But firstly, oh, just a second, I will go to full screen. Yeah. But firstly, shortly about Ukrainian Climate Network. We are a network of Ukrainian civil society organizations working in different with different climate issues. We work with policies. We work with practice, mode clean renewable energy and transport. We work in climate education. So we have over 30 local NGOs. And as Anna said before, Ukrainian electrical grid, it showed us during the invasion, it actually was affected very negatively and numerous times by the Russian armed forces. And basically, what we've seen is the limits of centralized legacy power grids that we have in Ukraine, because most of the power grid is still it's left from we have that from the Soviet Union. It is very centralized, and destroying these points, potential points of failure, several of them can actually cause great damage to the consumers in terms of blackouts. And we've seen that now we have blackouts all over Ukraine. And that brings up the question of local energy security, because the country is its people, its communities, and the truth is that in the modern civilized world, the citizens and communities must have access, at least partial access, to electricity, no matter what the situation in the world is. And the modern, the new technologies, new energy technologies allow that. And why electricity? Well, because we all understand that electricity ensures access to so many critical social services for the communities and for citizens. These are access to information, communication and coordination between communities. It is safety. It's being able to call up the emergency services. It's lighting in the dark hours. It's administrative services, because local bureaucracy still has to work. And it's heating and cooling. Why heating? Well, because most of the modern heating systems, even if they work on biomass or gas or some other fuel source, they still are dependent on electricity to be functional. In Ukraine, I'm going to show some cases how off-grid and hybrid energy solutions, solar energy solutions, help Ukrainian communities to deal with this crisis that we've had, especially in the occupied territories. So for the first example, you can see the arrows here, which are pointing at the off-grid solar power plants. It is in the town of Mila in Kiev region. The story is that refugees from Crimea who moved out from Crimea during the occupation in 2014 formed this kind of settlement near Kiev. They have several dozens of houses in this settlement, and only 2 off-grid solar power plants. So they've been under months of occupation without access to electricity at all. So the grid was badly damaged, and there was no way to repair it because of the military actions. So these 2 autonomous power plants allowed them to use their phones to keep in touch with their relatives and to see the news, see what's going on in Ukraine, to charge up some appliances, tools, to use their water pumps, which is very important, and we often don't think about that. But water pumps, they work on electricity, and in order for many people to get water from underground, you need to have electricity. So now they're thinking about over like 10 households are thinking about building off-grid solar power plants after this experience. Another example of people of solar energy helping people in Ukrainian communities is the town, a village near. Actually, it's like 30 kilometers from the Chernobyl, right on the edge of on the border of exclusion zone. And this man that you see on the picture, he had the autonomous power plant and also on a grid-tied power plant, which used to work under green tariff. So what he did basically when they were occupied and out of electricity is to disassemble his part of his solar plant and with giving away like 2-3 solar power solar panels and some appliance like controllers to it to local people, he was able to help basically to provide electricity to 50 households in his village in some form. With of course, but 50 households, so it's over, I guess, 100 people could have electricity. And they use it for phone charging, for other non-powerful devices, sometimes for water pumps also. And also taught people how to use panels, which is very great. Here you can see the some of the examples of how people installed the panels in their households. So it's very simple solutions, and they don't give a lot. But if you have nothing, even a little electricity is good. And also this, which is very interesting, these solar panels, they were used to provide power to a nursing home in the neighboring village, who had like 100 inhabitants during occupation without access to any services. And again, access to water, lighting, and device charging for old people, for the staff of this nursing home was helpful. Well, this example is very interesting one also because Slavutich is the city where it's the satellite town of Chernobyl nuclear power plants. Many engineers and electricians live there who work at the Chernobyl power plant, and they have this cooperative, which is kind of crowdsourced 200 kilowatt peak solar power plant, but no backup storage again, because it sells all the electricity to the grid with the green tariff. So the locals, kind of being engineers, they adapted this power plant to at least give some electricity directly from the panels to some devices to charge anything they needed, like battery, this storage, like accumulators, car accumulators, phones, etc. And going and adding to these examples, because there are like tens and maybe hundreds of examples like this in Ukraine. And added to that is also many during the war, many Ukrainian companies developed this like mobile or not very powerful cheap solutions which people and armed forces of Ukraine can use, and they were very helpful for our soldiers because they have they have communication devices, they have drones which they have to charge, and other stuff, and the local people, like for example, mobile hospitals which work in the areas where the military action is, they've been very helpful. And like to sum up as a conclusion, maybe I would say that electricity, as I said before, it's an integral part of modern society. We have to have electricity, at least in some amount, because we need to have an access to these many critical services that people want, that people need. And we've seen in Ukraine that centralized grid is quite flexible, but it has its limits, and we've reached those limits. We have blackouts here and there in Ukraine. Everybody experiences that. So I think well, my main message here is that the policies that the countries develop, which deal with renewable energy, I think should incentivize off-grid and hybrid solutions in communities to unlock their social, economic, and of course climate benefits. And I didn't say climate at least one time during my presentation. Climate benefits of renewable energy, as we all agree, are huge. But let's not forget, and in our advocacy and for the CSO, for the politicians, we have to stress on the social and economic benefits and political benefits, geopolitical benefits for every country of developing decentralized renewable energy. So financial indicators are not the final criteria because we've made this mistake in Ukraine where we basically over supported the grid tie renewable energy over the hybrid and off-grid solutions, and we are in the situation now where we pay the price for that. If we've done that before, much more people would be able to have access to electricity and suffer less during this crisis that we are right now during the war. So yeah, I think that's from my side. Here are the contacts of Ukrainian Climate Network, and indeed my personal. If you want to write me, call me out, please do that, and let's have some interesting conversation. And I give the floor back to Anna, and ready. I'm here till the end of the event and ready to answer your questions. Please.
Thank you, Maxim. Thank you very much for sharing those examples. Here, I would like to. As Michael Bloss has joined us, I already introduced you before you came. As we will move out a bit and zoom out from what's happening in Ukraine, we have this discussion because we saw and we see how probably the society perception of what are renewables will be changing with these circumstances. That's why we have these examples, and we'll be discussing even more. How did you see, from your perspective, for the whole of Europe, what has changed since 24th of February in terms of further development of renewable energy solutions, and what would be the role you think of this local decentralized systems? Do you also think, or do you actually see the discussions about them providing more resilience? Or it's more about, general discussions about more renewables as such. So if you could share with us some insights, that would be very, very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I'm really happy to be here and to speak at the Ukrainian pavilion. That's a important issue to me. As you probably said, I'm a member of the Energy Committee in the European Parliament and the Environmental Committee and of the German Green Party. And we stand in solidarity with Ukraine. We are having discussions in the European Parliament in our committees every week. There's also a contact group for the Ukraine. And I think it's really important to think about right now in this energy crisis also we have in Europe, not only about what happens in Europe, but also how we can power Ukraine and keep Ukraine kind of working also through the winter. That's one of the big issues that we are discussing. What is important is that we are funding still the Russian aggressor with buying fossil fuels of him, but also with the high prices globally. Russia is able to sell its oil and gas to very high prices, and it's really important to defund them. And that's one of the reasons to move. It's like there's so many reasons to move away from fossils, but this is now also one of the reasons, because what we are doing is actually we are funding Russia as an aggressor, but also lots of actually not so democratic regimes in this way. But it is true the situation has really changed since the 24th of February. At the very beginning, the the liberal finance minister of Germany, he coined the term renewable energies are now freedom energies, because they are the only possibility to provide freedom for the European Union, and but also for Ukraine. Because beforehand, Germany, but a lot of EU countries, they were absolutely dependent, and they still are dependent on Russian fossil flows, on Russian gas, coal, and oil. And this is, of course, used against the European Union as a weapon in the war. Like pushing up the prices of energy is creating very challenging situations for our societies. I mean, everyone, not only the poorer part of our society, they are thinking about how can they pay for their energy bills right now. We have massive support programs where we still have to find out how we actually finance that later on. And there is the inflation going. So this is all part of the dependency on fossil fuels and part of Russia's war strategy. So what has been done is we are currently anyway in this process of the Green Deal. We want to become climate neutral, reduce our share or our CO2 emissions fastly. So this has been brought forward. We have a renewable energy directive, for instance. What has been done, we want to have in the EU by the year 2030 45% of the overall energy mix coming from renewable sources. In Germany, 80% of the electricity coming from renewables, and in Germany we want to become 100% renewable by the year 2035. But as it was also portrayed, it requires a very different an electricity market, a very different grid system, and what is part of a resilient electricity and energy system is its decentralization. And this is how that is also what we need to plan for now with the reform of the electricity market design on the European level that is now being pushed forward, but also, of course, empowering local communities, energy communities to produce their own renewable energies. So there is this concept, for instance, of energy communities in the European Union and in the European law that has to be introduced in all of the member states, that renewable energy can be shared within communities and can be cheap, and you don't have to pay the grid surcharges and so on. So this is all going in this direction. So there's a speed up coming from this from this attack on Ukraine in our energy transformation. That's great, but also on the other hand, we have to also admit that because less gas is used now to produce energy, we use more coal in Europe, in Germany, which is actually worse for the climate. But the deal is that we speed up the renewable energy transformation in such a way that this more coal use is then basically weighed out by a faster renewable energy transformation. And for instance, currently we are working a lot on permitting, on speeding up the permitting. And I'm come from Baden-Württemberg, a region in Germany where it sometimes takes 8 years, or no, the average is actually 8 years to build a wind power plant. That's impossible. This is not the speed we can have. The European Union just, the Commission last week just put up a proposal that says for every solar, for solar panels on rooftops, it has to be 1 month for the permitting. And if there is no permit after 1 month, we assume that the permitting is there. So there's a deadline for all of the authorities. And for repowering, or for instance, wind power plants, also 1 month, and for new wind power, it's 1 year. So I think it's speeding up. We're going into a more decentralized system. And that was a push also from this war in Ukraine, because we understood that the fossil dependency is not only very detrimental for the climate, but also for our kind of geopolitical position. But really, I think the most important thing that we should be thinking of is not us, but it is Ukraine, and how we can support Ukraine sustain its electricity, because we see that there is also, I mean, Russia is attacking the electricity production, and we need to be supporting them with everything we have to come through the winter and withstand the Russian aggression.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your support. I would probably mention here as a moderator, but summarizing many discussions we had at the Ukrainian pavilion before. During these days, we had representatives of our cities coming, just speaking yesterday, and many started working on projects to replace fossils with, with other sources of energy. What is crucial at the moment is, for example, for water supply systems, some cities are changing those by having energy supplies from solar stations with storage and diesel generators as a backup system, not as a main source. Although we hear a lot from our government who are asking for more diesel generators because they can provide energy 24/7 during these critical times. But this is an ask. If you don't see this in the discussions that you are having as a support for Ukraine, definitely there are interested cities, and definitely there is a demand for renewable installations as a basics for new energy supply, and then diesels and everything else as a backup. So we already have the stories, and in any case, it should be the part of the plan, even though, of course, the government may not be asking directly for that, but we know the cities do. So that's the message. Thank you for much. I know you have to run probably for the next meetings, but thank you for joining us today. And I will pass the word now to Baktigul, who will share the stories from how civil society could help and with the also support of clean energy solutions in also other crisis situations in Kyrgyzstan. If you could share us the story from your country.
Thank you. Hi, dear participants. Thank you for having me here in Ukrainian's pavilion. I want to express my deeply thanks to my colleagues that you are having me here, and I wish victory to Ukraine, because your victory is going to be our victory as well, victory from dictatorship and victory from colonialism. So I want to give small overview of my country, Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan is a very small country in Central Asia. We have 7 million population. Recently, we have been 7 million in our country, and we are bordering with another Central Asian countries, with Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, China, and Kazakhstan. And from Soviet Union power, we have generated some problems in our border, and we are having lots of clashes with Tajikistan. We have problems, water problems, and other issues with Tajikistan. So recently in September, we have very violent clashes in our border in the south part of our country, in Batken region. So next slide, please. From 14th of September till 17th of September, we had armed clashes in our border, and 63 Kyrgyz citizens lost their life in these border clashes, and more than 132 people were evacuated, displaced to another places of our country, and 623 homes were destroyed. More than 12,000 houses stayed without electricity, cut off from electricity, and we had energy communication problems. We had destroyed energy communication system in our country. And especially it was very hard for our border guards to fight against, to defend themselves without any power. So in our border checkpoints, when border clashes are happening, always electricity power stations and electricity lines are becoming first target for Tajik army and our army as well. So in our border checkpoints, we didn't have electricity, and our border guards and our army asked us to help, asked people to help to get some power banks, to have some, to provide some extra help for them. And I want to point out on our civil society power in this enormous, hard time. Our civil society was very helpful, very supportive, and they had initiatives, lots of initiatives, and they provided lots of help to evacuees, to army as well. Next slide, please. And as you see, this is not illustration. Actually, this was a real picture of children who were next to the border clash villages, and who was a neighbor, and they were providing extra place for refugees. There you can read Uybar, it means we have a home, we have a place for you, for refugees. So our Ukrainian, she's a Ukrainian illustrator. She made this illustration, Tatiana Zelenska, and we were proud to share this illustration everywhere. So our civil society collected lots of money, more than 300 million soms for support of border refugees, and also implementing new ways to help to our refugees and to our army. So we started to raise money, food bank, and also we were looking for new ways how to help, how to provide electricity and power to our army. And three of volunteers, one of them IT engineer, and second is a normal engineer, and third is PR manager. They started to raise the money for small portable solar panel stations to give to border guards. And they didn't know the meaning of their work, but they wanted to raise money as much as quickly. And within 2 days, they raised $3,000, and they made 6 portable solar panel stations to border guards. And that was, amazing part of their job. They didn't realize of their, power of their job, but our border guards needed to power their facilities, their devices like drones, like weapon optic mechanisms, and cell phones, etc. So they provided these portable solar panel stations to them, and they, build up the mechanism, because in our country, our energy system completely dependent on hydropower stations, coal, and our, we are exporting fuel from Kazakhstan and Russia. We are dependent on gas from Russia. So we don't have renewable energy system like in Ukraine or like in Europe. So we don't have, wind power stations or solar panel stations, and we don't know how to build such a stations as well. So in terms of this, lack of knowledge, that was a very brave idea to make such a stations for our volunteers. And I met with them after all this happened, and I invited them to our studio. By the way, I am working as a journalist as well to Radio Free Europe and Liberties Kyrgyz service. So I invited them to our studio, and I made a program with them, and I said to them that in Ukraine, volunteers are making the same help, same support to the army. And because before I read about Eco Actions initiative to raising money to the army and to providing some solar stations to army. And they were amazed, they were shocked, and they said, wow, we need to get in touch with these guys and to ask their experience. And so they didn't realize about their amount of support. And now they are starting to collect to raise the money for another project, for another small stations for the schools of Batken region, because more than 14 schools, 15 schools, around 15 schools stays nowadays without electricity, without heating system, and more than 1,000 people, 1,000 children are staying without education. So they want to raise money for these schools, and also they want to raise money for, for making small solar panel stations for local hospitals as well. And they're willing to get some knowledge, get some support from their colleagues from abroad, and they applied to the support to the Uzbekistan, and they had some consultation from Uzbek IT engineers and from Uzbek engineers as well. And as we realized that Uzbekistan has some kind of experience building small solar panel power stations, and so now they are cooperating with Uzbek colleagues to build portable solar panel stations. And it's very hard when we are having border clashes constantly, and we are having destroyed houses, destroyed electricity system. In such a cases, it would be very nice, to have kind of a portable system which can provide, power to our people. So, so this guy actually, he's an engineer. His name is Askar, and he's only 25 years old. And when we were speaking with him, and he said he just wanted to help. He just wanted to, provide some support to our army. And we have thousands, more than 100,000 of volunteers who willing to support our army, willing to support our refugees, and even our labor migrants in Russia, in the US, in Turkey. They are, raising money to support our, these guys, drawers of idea. So I think recently I read about Eco Club in Ukraine started to raise the money for hospitals, renewable energy sources, and that was, good news for us as well. And we have a big issue on electricity in our country. In the winter time, especially, we have lots of electricity cuts. And when our guys were informed about the Eco Club's initiative, they said, wow, we need to follow them. And so Ukraine's initiatives always giving inspiration to our volunteers as well. So I think civil activism, civil volunteers, they can provide more extra help to support people, to support actual, victims of crisis, and to support government as well. So nowadays in our country, we have green initiative law legislation, but we don't have implemented, directly implemented, factually green initiatives, like, building solar power plants or wind powers, etc. So hopefully in the next future, in a very recent next future, we will have some, raised ideas, and we will have some good opportunities to make our country green and transformative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think it's really important to point out how things that you mentioned, that how fundraising first for the army, so for survival needs, then comes slowly to the realization that you can also finance for schools and for hospitals and so on. And this is where this changing of mindsets actually is coming into play. And as Michael pointed out, how renewable energy is freedom energy, and this is what you probably come to realize with time. And this is why it's important what's happening in our countries, to have it progressing. So now switching from the countries at war and hopefully very soon at peace again, to a very peaceful European country, which is Denmark, but that has already lots of really precious experience in developing local energy systems. Gunnar, you already told me about actually the cases when you also had crisis situations when there were also power cuts, disruptions from other countries in Europe. So you also saw how to make the systems more resilient, and Denmark is thinking about it. So please share your experience. I think there is a presentation also from Gunnar on these issues. And not only, as we discussed a lot about electricity and solar, but also about heating systems, which are as important also for our countries. So please, Gunnar, just a second, we are showing you the presentation.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Gunnar Olsen. I'm from this International Network for Sustainable Energy, which is really a network of non-governmental organizations. We have EcoAction in Ukraine as a member, and we have members basically all over the world. And we are working politically for on energy, for sustainable energy, renewable energy, and energy efficiency. And also we are working with cooperation between the members. And of course, we have been studying how you can actually do renewable energy in local ways. We are not against the central solutions as such, but we think that there must be local solutions also. And I give some examples here, if you can take the next slide. The more local, the more resilient is basically a good way of thinking at it. The fewer lines and things can be obstructed on the way. But of course, just to put in diesel generators, as we heard before, is a short-term solution. You need a lot of diesel and it's not very efficient. But I'm very glad to hear that people in Ukraine and also now in Kyrgyzstan are starting to improve also solar panels, because they could have a long life in the sense that after the war, they can be included in local solar stations. And there can be systems where you're even combining grid electricity with local off-grid solutions. So when the grid is there, you get the power from the grid, but when and from the solar, and that even helps the grid because the solar will produce locally, so you don't need so much transmission losses like if the production is all centralized. And then when there is a power cut, then you can switch it off and you can start to use it as a local solution. Of course, then you need to have a battery if you want to have power 24/7. I'm just showing two sketches. The first one is a simple, what you call a solar home system, where you just have a solar charge controller. You can have an inverter, so you can make AC current locally. And the lower one is such a system where you have solar and also could have wind for power production in an island grid, we call it, which is off-grid, or a mini grid where you actually are connecting to the bigger grid, and then just have the benefit from both of them. And in Denmark, we have tried also an even little bigger solution where you have like a whole town or a local area like a town where you actually have production locally. It could be from wind and combined heat and power in our case. And then if there is a power cut, they can continue as long as there's they can make a local balance between the power production and the power demand. They can actually continue to work and have electricity in that area, even if the big grid is out. We tried it out some years ago when there started to be some problems in the European central grids, but I think the problems have been solved now for the central level, but it still could be interesting to many other places where there's not such a big central grids or not so stable central grids. And of course, the good thing is that local power in normal times will also help the grid and reduce power losses. Yeah, next. But also heating is a big issue. It's a big issue in Ukraine, but it's also a big issue in Denmark and most of Europe. And we have in Ukraine and many other countries and in Denmark also quite a lot of heating done by district heating instead of gas, which is the other main source of heating in Europe. And as we know, we need to go out of gas, but unfortunately, many of the Ukrainian heating stations and some of the Danish ones are heated by gas. So we need to find alternative solutions. And here we are also speaking about relatively smaller systems. I mean, the big towns are big systems, but in these cases, we have smaller systems. And here in Denmark, we've developed solar heating, which is a picture on the top. So these panels are not producing electricity, they're just producing heat. And in most cases, they can provide, say, 20% of the heat just for the summer and a little bit for spring and autumn. And in a few cases, we made some huge water storage, so you actually can have heating all the year round with solar heating. What you see at the bottom is heat pumps, where we take air and cool it down, and then with use of electricity, we use that to heat up water at a higher temperature. It's becoming very popular in Denmark and in many other places, and we use it also for district heating, because then we can have what you also have. We have water storage tanks, so you don't need, so you can use the solar or the heat pumps when there's a lot of sun or when there's cheap electricity, and then you can have heat for the rest of the days. Of course, the problem with heat pump is that you need a lot of electricity, so you need to be sure that you have some green electricity and that at least it's working most of the day. We're also working on geothermal heating. It's underground, so it's not difficult to find a picture from. And also waste heat from industries. All countries have some industries which are producing heat and have waste heat, which can be used also for district heating. In Denmark, we're also using store-fired heating and some biomass. We are producing a little too much imported wood at the moment, but for the stores, we produce ourselves, and it's also an option. So go to the next. But of course, thinking about supply, it's also important to think about energy efficiency and energy savings. So we've been developing a catalog in the Inforce network, how to save electricity, and now we have it in English in Ukraine and even in Russian. And if you go to the next slide. This is just some of the things that you can save a lot just by behavioral changes. Be sure to switch off things, place refrigerators distant from heat, turn off the standby, and other good advices that you can find on our website. And we also can use, of course, invest in better, like changing light bulbs and have efficient equipment. So so I'll invite you all to take a look at our website and and also find this catalog together with other things. So just to finish, we are working with a number of cooperation projects with Ukraine, where we are actually working on how Ukraine cities can go to more renewable heating, but also a number of other solutions on energy efficiency. Thank you.
Yes, we have a question straight away. Please, if you could introduce yourself. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, it's just quite nosy here. Could you please explain us a little bit about straw burning heat? So what kind of station it should be built? It should be built close to agricultural fields or somewhere. What kind of power and it can be produced there? So just didn't hear you well, sorry.
Straw-fired heating can be done in many sizes. We have smaller systems which are just for a few houses or a big farm, where you just have one big bale of straw that you put in at a time, and then you have maybe once a day in the summer, and in the winter 3 times a day you have to put in a new straw bale. But I mean, they're usually big ones, and that would be 300 kilowatts. Yeah, and then we have bigger stations where it's feeding in automatically, where you have a big storage of straw, and then you are are feeding it into the heating station. And in a few places, we also have combined heat and power, so it also produces electricity. And they are the sizes from 1 megawatt and up to, I think the biggest one is 100 megawatt heating and 50 megawatt electricity. So they combine, yeah. They take longer time to install. It's like making another power plant. It takes a few years to build, while the small ones, they can more or less just be put on a truck and put into place.
The quality of straw is very important. I mean,
Yes, I mean, you need to have the straw. It should not be too wet. It has to be, if it's too wet, if it's more than 20% water, it's difficult to make it burn. So there's always need a quality control.
Thank you. And particularly, you wanted to comment too? Okay. Yeah. So we have questions clarified for now, and we still have one speaker with us online to continue these discussions from the solutions that exist to the reconstruction of Ukraine. So I would like to welcome Konstantin and to reflect on what the role for renewable, this decentralized renewable energy systems is there in the current reconstruction plan, current reconstruction strategy, and what should be its role in the future for Ukraine. Please.
Yeah, thank you, Anna, and hello, everybody. Maxim so viscerally described what has been happening in Ukraine and how small installations of renewables truly helped people to survive the occupation and or blackouts. But I want also to shift the focus a little bit and talk about and highlight potential future and the role that renewables, renewable models can and should have during Ukraine's reconstruction process. Because the situation with our energy system, I would say each day it gets more serious and worsens. 2 days ago, Russia launched 96 cruise missiles, anti-aircraft missiles, drones, specifically targeting Ukrainian energy system throughout all of Ukraine. And this was the largest one-time missile attack since the start of the full-scale invasion in February. And personally, I'm lucky actually to be talking to you right now because several rockets hit 2 apartment buildings just 10 minutes away from our office in Kyiv. So new power outages, new emergency electricity cutoffs started all around the country. So the issues of energy security, the issues of energy resilience have never been so urgent, as well as the questions how our energy system will look like in the future. Because truth be told, right now, we don't know what generation capacities we will have in, let's say, in 2 months' time, 3 months' time, in 4 months' time, how much and how damaged they will be due to continued Russian attacks. And I think it's safe to assume that they will continue. And so we need, in Ukraine, we need a new paradigm to think about our energy supply, especially in and for municipalities, and some level, well, actually, I would say some high level of decentralization is needed because we see the price of having a very centralized system that can be put out of order more easily due to attacks. And renewables, small installations in the communities can be the key aspect in this whole story. And my previous remarks are more like a general remarks of like zoom out of the whole picture. And now I want to zoom in on concrete examples where we as civil society organization and our partners are trying to show the potential sustainable solutions in the reconstructions right now. So together with our partners, together with Greenpeace and NGO Eco Club, and the collection, we decided to help rebuild a damaged building near Kyiv. As you probably remember, especially February, March, there were heavy fighting around Kyiv, and many municipalities, many communities were heavily damaged and in some cases destroyed. So we decided to go outside of Kyiv and show on the example of a small hospital. So basically it's like a center where people go for consultations to get checkups. So people don't actually go there to invest and receive treatment, they go for consultations. We decided this building was damaged. Its heating system was badly damaged. It relied heavily on gas. And we decided to switch the heat supply from gas to installing heat pumps and to install the solar panels on the roof for basically self-consumption purposes. And this was like the main idea. The community itself is already thinking about recovery, it's already thinking about reconstruction. So the initiative on the local level, it's there. You can see it throughout Ukraine. We just need, and our government and international partners need to just support it. And we decided to show how the reconstruction can be done even now, and to show this as a potential for the future. Because what we are now doing, we are understanding that we are doing with limited resources, yes, and we are doing still under the firings from Russia and from the territory of Belarus. But to show conceptually that you do not need to rebuild buildings as they were before, because in Ukraine we have buildings, especially from the Soviet period, from the 70s and 80s, they're extremely energy inefficient. We don't need to rebuild as it was before. And to show that you can rebuild with renewable energy, that you can rebuild keeping in mind the energy savings policies and energy efficiency is realistic even now. So we are helping, and I think the results we can show you in a couple of months. I think by the end of December, the hospital will resume its operations, because currently it's closed because there is no heating, people cannot go there. And with this project, we decided to focus on our main messages, that our recovery plan that is still being developed, and there is a draft presented, that there needs to be a special focus on decentralized generation of renewables, that nearly zero emission buildings Ukraine can and should build far earlier than currently imagined and envisioned, and that new support mechanism for renewable energy generation, such as net metering or net billing, they need to be adopted, and not to wait just saying, okay, we'll do it after the no, we can and should do it and plan for it and prepare right now. And also what Gunnar also touched upon, we are trying to help municipalities, 3 municipalities in Ukraine with documentation for the switching to heat pumps in their heat generation. So these kind of small projects, they are popping up throughout the Ukraine. And we need to support this kind of initiative, and our government needs to prioritize decentralized generation. Because in July, in Switzerland, our government presented a draft recovery plan, which has a separate part and section on energy. And one of the principles of the recovery plan is to build back better. The plan explicitly states the possibility of implementing EU principles to the transition to the green economy. However, if you analyze the already existing proposals for energy sector, I would call it like a large shopping list involving all stakeholders, because they envision new projects of oil, new domestic gas production, construction of new nuclear units, hydropower capacities, hydrogen from renewable energy, a little bit mention of the development of renewable energy. And it looks like a little bit, it lacks focus, it lacks the vision how Ukraine, using these horrible experiences that we are living through right now, how can we truly become energy independent and how can we ensure energy security and energy resilience? Because yes, right now in Ukraine, you can talk about the climate crisis and climate change and the need to lower the emissions. But I think now living through this collective experience, living without heat, living without electricity, blackouts happening throughout the country, I think currently it would be and it's much easier to communicate the issues of climate through the security, energy independence from Russia, energy security on the municipal level. It's very important. And what lacks, in my opinion, and what also we are discussing with different municipalities and partners that we are working with, the specific as a real cost-effective and cost-efficient solution. And frankly, renewables can help not only during the extreme crisis event like war, but also guide and help a truly green and sustainable transformation during the recovery process from the war.
Thank you, Konstantin. We were afraid we lost you by the end. The connection breaks.
I think this can. Oh, can you hear me now?
The connection is not very stable.
Okay.
Last minute. But I suggest that we received your message regarding the improving the plan and having more greener solutions in the plan. So we would now move to the round of discussions. So stay with us. I guess the connection may improve, I hope. I have a few questions to our speakers, and in fact, whoever feels like talking about this a bit. One is about the scale, because we are talking about local energy solutions. Well, here at the Ukrainian pavilion, we are showcasing more like larger renewables, which are just in front of our eyes, big wind turbines and solar panels and so on. So how to actually balance local systems with this larger scale renewables? So is there a perfect balance? What it depends on? This is my first question. And the second question is about the costs, because this is something that is always important, because of course it costs to invest into something, but of course we understand that renewables pay out, and very often they pay out very quickly. But if we compare with the cost of fossil fuel based systems, renewable based systems, you know, what is the cost difference, and how to convey this message to decision makers that actually renewables are in fact cheaper. Whoever wants to go first, I see Gunnar is prepared to answer. If you could start.
Yeah, I think the news is what is now the situation is that wind power and solar on a larger scale is actually cheaper than fossil fuels, on the condition that you can get good financing for it, because the problem with the renewables is you pay everything up front, while for fossil fuels you pay it as you go. So with a good loan, it's cheaper. Then, of course, when you come into smaller systems like we talk about now, it's more expensive to make 100 smaller systems than one big system that goes for many things, and it also goes for energy. So there it's really a question of how much extra we should invest in getting the security that you can do it, even if there are problems with the grids. But there's one good thing about the more local systems. And here we are speaking about, for instance, a school will have solar on the whole roof, or that size. It's actually not so much, it's actually not necessarily more expensive than having grid electricity, if you, depending on how the prices, because the problem with the prices of the grid and the problem with electricity, it's very political. If there's a decision that there's a build power plants with lots of subsidies, of course, that can produce cheap electricity, not by the real economics, but by some kind of subsidy economics. So it's also a political issue where the state and the international community is putting its money. But if it's put its money right, it'll be cheaper also for these kind of smaller solutions. Yeah. Yeah, and the balance is that it's a good idea that when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, that that they can actually produce twice as much as you actually need, so that the same line which puts in power during no wind and no sun can take out the power again when there's sun and wind in a local area, and it can be used in industries and other places who doesn't have this so much opportunities. So I think that's where the balance is, that you should use the lines both ways, and then it's just a question of finding that how much you can actually put on a local line before you can export as much as you import at other times.
Thank you. I don't know if Maxime wants to comment also, perhaps on costs of renewables, especially in Ukraine. You probably know a lot about this. Does it make sense to build renewables in Ukraine at the moment? But of course, I'm asking because now renewables are always competing with fossil fuel-based systems in any case. So what are your main arguments?
I think no one actually clearly knows what is the cost of renewables at the moment in Ukraine. Especially if we are talking about large scale, because there's the cost of capital, insurance, and stuff like that. But anyway, globally, yeah, renewable energy is already cheaper than new fossil capacities. And but what I would like to stress on is like 2 points. The first point is that when balancing the system, the overall system, energy system, I think we need to. That's the idea. That's where the whole idea of redesigning the energy system for the future comes in. So if we are talking about developing decentralized systems, then we need to understand that we need to have a much more flexible and much more inclusive systems, like local systems, where the consumption will be near or at the point of generation, where we will have different kinds of storage and stuff like that. And then on the high level, the grid operator would have to deal with this new mode of energy generation and consumption, and develop mechanisms how to balance it all together. That's why on the higher level, on big scale, there are great developments of energy storage, like utility energy storage and different balancing capacities. So it's a whole new. I cannot give you, for example, I cannot give you a concrete answer on that. We are in the process of finding of building or starting to build the new energy systems in different countries. On the point of the costs and how to finance it, look, consumer always pays. I think we all understand that in the end. So what the governments and well, mainly the governments as the regulators, what they can do is basically to make the costs more bearable for the consumer in terms of in the form of loans, in the form of different subsidies, different incentives, which basically make the customers who in the end pay for the energy pay less now, stretch it over time, or use some different mechanism. It's a great conversation. It's a great dialogue that everyone is having now in the world. The mechanisms of support for renewable energy, and I think, but we need to remember that people who use the energy will pay for that energy, no matter what. We just have to figure out the best mechanisms for everything to happen, and for them to more easily bear the cost of the energy.
Thank you. Perhaps there are any questions at this point in the audience to our speakers. If not yet, I would like to check with Baktigul if you see how far you think the country already progressed in renewables and changing again the mindsets of people. By the way, do you already have subsystems with storage also? You have, oh, it's mostly about small scale solar, yeah. So you didn't go, but how do you see further developments and for the country moving? Did the government already start understanding the importance of small scale renewables? So do you see any progress in this direction?
So in my opinion, government, if want, they can do everything because we are very close to China. And if diplomatic ways and if they, you know, agree with some trade agreements, they can provide very cheap solar panel equipments and they can build very nice wind power stations as well. But legislation and infrastructure is not ready yet. But within the activism of civil society and environmental NGOs, which are one of them are our members, Climate Action Network, Eastern Europe, Caucasus and Central Asian members. It's a unison group. They are trying to implement by themselves some small initiatives to provide solar panel stations, small solar panel stations to guest houses, tourism guest houses in Istanbul. It's a most, you know, well-known place for Central Asian tourists, and they are providing some small solar power and wind power stations to south of the country, to Osh and Jalalabad, because probably you know that Kyrgyzstan is a mountainous country, and our power lines and power system is very old from Soviet Union, so we need some renovation. And if our civil society will be active and they will provide some consultation or I don't know agreements with government, and to, you know, to say to the government that instead of renovating the old system and building hydropower stations, we can easily buy very cheap solar power stations from China, and we can agree with them, and we can provide renewable energy to our remote villages and remote places. It would be very nice, and I hope with the help of the environmental NGOs and environmental activists, very soon we can do these initiatives. So they are moving forward for it.
This underlines a lot, of course, the role of civil society, that they actually can change things. Sometimes it feels like nothing moves ahead, but at certain points, that especially during crisis, we can see how important civil society is in our countries and how it's helping also progress very important decisions and, in fact, in the end, solutions to fight climate change, right? So I have actually a question to Gunnar. I wanted to ask it straight away when you were talking, but I thought a question to Gunnar and Konstantin. So Gunnar had a list of different technologies for heating systems. What could be alternatives for fossil fuels heating systems? You had solar thermal, you had heat pumps, but you didn't have anything about hydrogen. And here there's a lot of talks about hydrogen. Of course, it's larger scale solutions, but so the question to you and to Konstantin, what do you see the role of green hydrogen? Well, for Europe, for your respective countries too, could that be also an alternative to gas, especially to gas? Of course, this is the way it's discussed at the moment. So what do you think about this?
Well, we're talking a lot about green hydrogen in Denmark. And we are talking about making, beside the gas network we have, which will be less and less in the coming years because there will be less gas use, and people will, after some years, we expect we will only use biogas in Denmark, no fossil gas anymore, but maybe 10 years from now. But then we'll talk about developing this hydrogen network. But the hydrogen network is only makes sense because at the same time the government decided to support development of a lot of wind power and also solar. And that means that in some minutes, hours of the year, there'll be so much wind or so much solar power that we cannot use it. Of course, we might sell something to other countries, but still there will be some surplus because there, I mean, there's a variations always in the wind and the sun, and then sometimes we have enough, and sometimes we have too little, and sometimes we have too much. In those hours we have too much, we can, of course, we can stop. It's easy to stop a solar. You can just stop taking the power and nothing happens. Wind power, you can physically stop it. But that's, of course, not the idea of building all this. The idea is that in those hours, we should then use it to, for instance, producing hydrogen. And then it becomes green hydrogen 5-10 years from now. But it only works if you actually have this excess renewable energy, because as long as you only have renewable energy that you need to supply for your own, and maybe we talk about heat pumps, they need more power than we use today. So we also need the power for that. But only when you have met these demands, then there will be excess electricity, and then that could be used for hydrogen. And that's what we hope to develop in Denmark, not next year, but maybe starting 5 years from now.
And just a clarifying question, we are talking about, can we be talking about small scale green hydrogen? Do you imagine it would make sense?
It's actually discussed. It's a bit also discussion in Denmark, because the actual producer of, I mean, this electrolysis units that you use to produce the hydrogen, they are not necessarily so big. So I mean, you're probably not speaking about individual houses, but it could be in each town or something. But the problem with hydrogen is that you need to have a whole infrastructure. You need to have safety, because it's a flammable, it's a new technology which is not known to the same extent like gas, which of course is also just as flammable, but where we have 100 years experience in how to deal with it. So that's why it's a question whether we'll have this like medium-sized hydrogen, or we'll have just a few very big hydrogen stations. We're still looking at the issue. And the first examples in Denmark is one plant which is being built, which is like 20 megawatts, which is like a fairly big plant.
That's very interesting. Thank you. But we are talking about 5-10 years plus perspective for now.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying it out now, but the larger scale and to have this like hydrogen network and things like that will be only by then. And it will not be to replace the gas, because it will not be to heat houses, and it will not be to cook. It'll be for hydrogen vehicles. It can be produced hydrogen fuel for transportation, for like shipping, where it's difficult to use renewable energy. And also we expect, actually there's a plan to, of the plans are not approved yet, but I mean, those ideas are to export it to Germany, because they have industries which produces now fossil-based hydrogen, and we can replace also the fossil-based hydrogen with the green hydrogen. So there's another way, a more industrial way of using it.
Right, thank you for this. Konstantin, same question. Well, in regard of Ukraine and the use of green hydrogen in Ukraine.
Yeah, Anna, you touched on one of my favorite topics, actually, is the hydrogen, because hydrogen, it cannot be viewed as a silver bullet to all sectors. It needs to be used and prioritized only for those processes that cannot easily be electrified and powered directly from renewable electricity. And hydrogen, the use of hydrogen should be prioritized only when there are no practical alternatives. So, for example, as Gunnar mentioned, like heavy vehicle transport, production of some green building materials, long distance shipping, aviation, that's possible. But talking about using hydrogen for heating in buildings, for using hydrogen for just private cars, I think it's actually, even looking at the cost, it's crazy when you have the alternative directly with renewable energy and renewable electricity. And currently, Ukraine, like 2 years ago, Ukraine started flirting with green hydrogen in relation to its export to the European Union. Our recovery plan right now has plans for additional 10, 15 gigawatts of renewables until 2032, and then 30 gigawatts of renewables specifically for hydrogen, specifically for green hydrogen. And this is, when you actually stop and think about it, it's a little bit like crazy, because the use needs to be prioritized. Even when we are talking about hydrogen in Ukraine, we need to create a market in Ukraine and then talk about export to other countries. For example, there are plans to do it with Germany. So we need to actually understand what to do and how to use it in Ukraine, and then start talking about export. But then building so much capacities of renewables that could go into our grid, but then they won't go there, it will go for the production of hydrogen. I think it's a little bit one of the points of our current plans that needs to be adjusted and rethought, I think, because in the current situation, in the current model, it doesn't make much sense, and it will be much actually cost much more money to do it and to realize it.
Thank you for this. I guess we'll be wrapping up. We actually are discussing for almost 1.5 hours already. So to sum up some of the important messages from today, well, again, I would like to repeat this wonderful phrase that the whole of Europe, and not only Europe, but in fact many countries in the world, came to realize that renewable energy is about freedom. Freedom from fossil fuels, not only from Russian fossil fuels, but actually from fossils as such, which very often lie in the hands of the countries who don't act in a good manner internationally, right? So renewable energy actually became an important, largely speaking, renewable energy, important solution for energy security. And here we agreed all together that the centralized system, and as Gunnar pointed out, the more decentralized renewable-based energy system is, the more resilient it is. But then the question comes of how much are we ready to invest into this very decentralized renewable system, because that requires changing actually the whole of energy system and the whole of the concept, how it functions. Because the system becomes more, it will require more flexibility, storage, and so on. So for the countries like Kyrgyzstan, for example, that has lots of hydro energy and coal, right? This old Soviet-based systems, how to transform that. And the same goes for Ukraine, that has huge nuclear power plants, thermal power plants, how to transform that into this new system. So we have probably more questions than answers for the moment, and of course we cannot answer them, but we have great examples from Denmark of how Denmark that has already moved ahead a lot and moving ahead with new solutions toward building this more resilient decentralized energy systems. I would like to thank all of the speakers for being with us today, all of those who listened online and offline. And just one little bit, I would like to redirect you with words. Unfortunately, I cannot show it quickly on the screen, to the website of Eco Club Rivne, I think .org.ua. Wait, let me check. So these are the colleagues who are collecting money to install solar plants. Solar stations on the hospitals in Ukraine. We really need solar and we really need, energy production for our critical infrastructure. And this could be an important solution. So solar station with storage and with maybe some diesel generators as a backup system, but only as a backup. So the, here we are showing, thank you so much, Oleg. So we are showing to you now the website. It's ecoclubrivne.org, and you can find the way to donate for their great initiative. Thank you very much again for joining. Slava Ukraini.